Our second reading, sermon text for this morning, is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. This is the walk to Emmaus. Now, on the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God, and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself from all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Let us begin in prayer. With prayer. Would you pray with me? Eternal God, in the reading of the Scriptures, may your word be heard. In the meditations of our hearts, may your word be known. And in the faithfulness of our lives, may your word be shown. Amen. This morning, I would like for you to think about and ponder this question. Where do you like to walk? And what is it that draws you to that location? Anybody like to volunteer? Where do you like to walk? Jay, the riverfront. Okay, Jay.
Bacon Creek because it's so beautiful.
Bacon Creek because it's so beautiful. Okay. Anaya.
Bacon Creek also because it has a park and it's really big.
Bacon Creek also because it has a park. Gary, where do you like to walk?
We walked in Stone Park.
Stone Park, yes.
The hike.
Mickey. Lakeview, Black Hawk Lake. Okay. One of the things that I've gotten back into the routine of doing while I've been off on vacation is walking. Now that then warmer weather was beginning, we kind of had a little bit of a setback. But as we get closer to the possibilities of warmer weather, we'll want to spend more and more time outside. And one of those things will be walking. Well, while I was away in St. Joe on vacation, I took time walking at several of the walking trails with my good church friend Jim Jeffers, who was from my home church. Jim is the one who played the bagpipes for me at my installation. We walked several of the walking trails there in St. Joe, and we also walked the track at his home high school, Central. I have a fairly common routine of walking in the summertime. Now, during the winter, I tend to slack off, and I don't walk as much, even though a congregant from First gave me a treadmill, and I have from time to time gone walking at the Southern Hills Mall with Gary's walking group, and I do the best I can in the wintertime, but I tend to slack off because it's just not the same as walking outside in nature, being in an enclosed area. The experience in an enclosed area is nothing like the experience of actually being outside in a park or on a walking trail, seeing the trees and the leaves blow. There are a lot of health benefits that you can get from walking. I have found that walking can be very therapeutic. If I'm having a bad day, feeling stressed out, or having writer's block, trying to figure out what next week's sermon will be, I find that if I take time to go for a walk, I tend to be less stressed out, and more imagination begins to bubble up within me, and all of a sudden I have sermon ideas that I never had before about maybe what the upcoming sermon will be in the future. The National Foundation for Cancer Research, in an online article entitled 5 Ways Walking Can Reduce Stress and Prevent Illness, by Brittany Supka, says that spending time outdoors is scientifically proven to improve your mood. Because when we exercise by walking, we release endorphins, or what we call feel-good hormones. This helps us lower the body's stress hormones over time. Our gospel reading for this morning is known as the Walk to Emmaus. The picture on the screen is a depiction of the encounter that the disciples had when they were going on that walk to Emmaus. And this is actually a picture I took of a picture downstairs at First Congregational in Whiting. They have this in their lounge room just before you go to their fellowship hall. But it depicts what our scripture reading is. Now, nobody knows where Emmaus is. No historian or biblical scholar has managed to find Emmaus on a map. The walk to Emmaus happens on the same day that Mary and some of the other women discover the empty tomb. And right after that, Luke gives us the story of these two disciples who we've never heard before going on this walk. One of them's name is Cleopas. The other one, we don't know what their name was. Luke doesn't tell us. Many Bible scholars assume that perhaps it was Cleopas' wife. Luke says that the walk from Jerusalem to Emmaus was 7 miles, so it would be like walking from Whiting to Ottawa, or Whiting to Sloan. And while they were walking and talking about all the events that happened in Jerusalem over that Holy Week period of time, Jesus shows up and begins to walk with them. But they don't know that it's Jesus, they just think it's a stranger. Luke tells us that their eyes were kept from recognizing who Jesus was. Why is it that these disciples were unable to see him, recognize Jesus? Then after their conversation with one another, the disciples arrive back home. It's getting late, so they want to make sure this stranger is safe, and they want to be hospitable. So they invite the stranger into their home for a meal around a table. And then it's at the table when the stranger blesses the bread and breaks it, that their eyes all of a sudden open up and they recognize this is no stranger, this is Jesus, and they disappear. How do we recognize and see Jesus working within our own everyday lives? Do we have the ability to recognize Jesus working within our lives? Or are we like the disciples were initially in this story, unable to see who Jesus is? Recently, I was at a legislative forum in Sioux City, and one of the constituents got up to ask the legislator a question about the cuts to the food stamp program. She was concerned and wanted to know what was going to happen with low-income families. And the representative asked her, well, do you know anybody that's on food stamps? And the constituent was just completely baffled because it seemed as if the representative didn't know anybody or thought that there was so few people on food stamps that it was not a pressing issue. So the representative was unable to see those low-income families. He was unable to see the impacts that the cuts would have on those low-income families. Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book, An Altar in the World, says that walking is one of the easiest spiritual practices that we have available to us. All it takes is a decision to walk with some awareness, both of who you are and what you are doing. Where you are going is not important. Detaching the destination from the walking is one of the best ways to recognize the altars you are passing right by all the time. Most of us spend much time thinking about where we have been or where we are supposed to be going, and we have a hard time recognizing where we actually are. When someone asks us where we want to be in our lives, the last thing that occurs to us is to look down at our own feet and say, here I am. The truth is made known to us in the labyrinth. We've talked about the labyrinth before. It's that giant circle within several smaller circles, and people can actually walk it. Now this week, Saturday, was Earth Day. We are observing it this morning. Earth Day is a day when we take the time to acknowledge the many blessings we receive from the earth God has created for us. And we acknowledge our responsibility to maintain and sustain the earth God has bestowed on us to steward, so it is there for future generations. In order for us to do this, we have to stop and be aware of our surroundings, of our everyday environment. We have to be present to the now, the right here, right now, that we have been blessed with. We must be present to the current moment in time that we are living in, not so preoccupied with the future. If we do not have awareness of the present, then there will be no commitment to working toward a sustained environment. Brown writes that after getting the opportunity to walk a labyrinth for the first time in her life, Brown writes this in her book about what that experience was like. The beauty of physical practices like this is that you do not have to know what you are doing in order to begin. You just begin. And the doing teaches you what you need to know. This week I had the privilege of sitting down with Arlene Baldus, who was a lifelong member of Mayflower, and we talked about all of the significant events in her life. There was one theme, though, that kept popping up over and over, and is that you learn by doing. She said those very same words as we recounted all of the significant events in her life. Teaching church kids at a church youth camp was something that she did that helped give her the encouragement to go on to college and become a school teacher. And she did that late in life. There were difficult times that she had with teaching kids. When she volunteered to teach these kids in this church camp, this was something new for her at the time, but she learned by doing. One of her experiences that she shared with me about the camp that was transformative for her was one morning that she overslept, and she came to the class late. And the kids jokingly referred to her as the late Mrs. Baldus. This was a transformative experience for her because it was through this experience that the kids began to accept her. Their use of humor was their way in which they signaled their acceptance of her. And we both acknowledge that gaining the acceptance of children you are teaching, especially teenagers, is not easy. The disciples are able to see Jesus when they invite him into their home and when they share a meal with him. It's at that moment, when the bread is broken around a table, that we all should be able to recognize Jesus. The disciples learn about Jesus and where they can find Jesus, which is in the doing, in the sharing of bread around the table. The logo on our sign out front here at Mayflower, I think, says it best. Jesus did it first, and now it's our turn. And that's what the two disciples do, the two Cleopas and the unnamed disciples. Once they have this experience, they don't stay where they're at. They turn around and go right back to Jerusalem, and they tell everybody else about what their experience was and who they've seen, and that it was in the breaking of the bread that they experienced Christ. When we see and experience Jesus through the ordinary practices of life, there is an aha kind of moment that happens. Luke tells us that after their encounter with the risen Christ, that their hearts burned within them. In our first reading from the book of Acts, the people experienced God through Peter's sermon in a similar kind of way. The text says that they were cut to the heart. The people respond to Peter's sermon by asking, what should we do? Some of us here today may be asking that same question about our own experience of the risen Christ. What should we do? Luke answers that question in this story of the walk to Emmaus. The disciples discover that the risen Christ can be seen and experienced when they focus on the present moment that they are currently living in. When bread is shared with strangers who are in need, and when they practice the same kind of table fellowship that Jesus practiced. The same is true for us today. It's now our turn, and you do not have to have any kind of special knowledge or insights about God. You just have to begin, because you learn and experience God by doing.